I would just say to people, if you're out there and you're in the armed services, for example, and you're wondering what to do next, don't come into politics if you think you're going to save the world, because you won't. But if you think you'd like to make your little contribution to trying to improve the way of life for people in the armed services, then do that.
In a Veterans in Politics podcast first, we are in the home of a Member of Parliament during recess. So thank you very much, James Gray, for inviting me to your home today. Really appreciate it. And before we get stuck into a few questions and find out a bit more about you, what's it like being an MP in recess? What goes on?
Well, thank you, Johnny, for coming here and not meeting me in Parliament or the constituency office or somewhere else. I mean, it's just great that I can sit at home like this and have a chat about an issue that's terribly close to my heart, namely both the armed services and indeed veterans. I mean, when the House rose last Thursday, it's immediately after the big statement they had about LGBTQ veterans from the 1990s. And you're wound up, you're tired, you're washed out, it's been a long term. And actually just coming here, back to Wiltshire, doing stuff, I've been quite busy, doing quite a lot of, made a speech at dinner last night, I was at a funeral yesterday afternoon, I've done a lot of stuff. But nonetheless, you're doing it in your jeans. And I'm sorry, I'm so scruffy. I hope you don't mind. And you're doing it in relaxed mode, doing it in your home. I work from my office here, in my home, and you just kind of unwind and recover and try and recharge the batteries a bit, which is great.
Well, it's great being here and great meeting you first time. In fact, I think we must have we coordinated wardrobes today because I too am in a polo shirt. And normally in my own political career, when you're at an MP's house, there's for two reasons really. One is because there's a bit of crisis going on, and the second bit is because you're planning a campaign or an election. So it's nice to actually be in an MP's house in relaxed surroundings and having a cup of coffee while we do it as well. So no, thank you for that and that insight as well. A lot of people think, when recess happens, that MPs sort of scuttle away. Absolutely, like all of us, the working population, you need a break. And yeah, you do go on leave, right? You do go on holiday, but there's also stuff to do with your families and friends in your home.
Well, and doing stuff around the constituency is very relaxing. I mean, this week I've done probably about 10 or 20 different engagements around the patch since we rose on Thursday. But you're doing it in a relaxed way, and it gets the brain going, and it gets the heart going, and you get to know your people better, and you see where you're going. I've got a boundary change coming up, so I've got a big new patch to learn about in Cirencester and Tetbury and South Gloucestershire. So I spend a lot of time out there meeting people, wandering around, walking down the high street, just going to shops and saying hello to people. And it's good fun.
And we're really lucky, actually, in this country. I've recently tried to reach out to some US politicians. You can't even direct message them on Twitter. They are that closed off. And I think it is, and of course we've experienced some tragic things that have happened to our members of Parliament in terms of Joe Cox and Sir David Amess, the most well publicised horrific murders. But we're so lucky that we can be so close to our members of Parliament.
We're very lucky that we're able to do that. I think it's very important. I think I have to be available to absolutely everybody all the time. That's my job. I need to know what people around North Wiltshire and in the Cotswolds are thinking. And so I spend my whole time just going to visit schools, visit businesses, I went to the Barn Theatre in Cirencester this week, and then I spoke at a dinner at the Royal Agricultural University in Cirencester, went to a church in Tetbury, a whole variety of stuff, just in order to see people and hear what they're thinking. And I think that's a very, very important part of our democracy. I mean, if we were shut away, as American Congress people are, you just don't get to hear what people are doing and thinking. And I also like to think that people know me. I like to think that when I walk down Cirencester High Street or Tetbury High Street, that people will stop me. It'll take me an hour to get from one end of the high street to the other because people will stop me. Hi, James, how's it all going? Now, David Amess in particular is a very, very close friend of mine, and it was a tragic murder. But that can happen to anybody in any profession, and I think that I had close protection officers for a couple of weeks after his tragic murder. But they very quickly came to the conclusion they were wasting their time and they were better out catching bad guys than hanging around in my surgery with a couple of ladies coming in to talk to me about the benefits. So, there are risks associated with this job, but there are risks associated with doing anything. And, nothing by comparison with the risks that are undertaken by our armed services, for whom I've got such a huge admiration.
Yeah, not just admiration, but an actual link. Like all of our guests, we like to begin with their military story, and like me, you served in the Army Reserve for a number of years, in fact, and that was based in London. So just tell us a little bit about your military story. I know we were talking before we came on air about that, and you made a little quip about your the dizzy heights of your military career. But I mean, why did you join in the first place, and what are your memories of that time?
Well, you'll be seeing some very senior people in this series of broadcasts. And you'll be seeing some very brave people, and people who served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere, people who have lost limbs, people who have really done courageous things and earned medals for it. I'm the opposite end of the spectrum, because I joined in 1977, at the height of the Cold War. I joined a very nice regiment, the Honourable Artillery Company, the oldest regiment of the British Army, in the City of London.
And it has an Act of Parliament associated with it as well?
It's got its own Act of Parliament. We've got a very fine headquarters, just very near St Paul's Cathedral. And I joined the gun troop. I was a gunner. Through some peculiarity, I joined as a grade 3 band 3 gunner, which is the lowest you can be. The moment you leave the recruits course, you should go up to grade 3 band 2 or something, and then you do your basic driving, then you do your basic gunnery, then you do, and so on and so forth. I did 7 years distinguished service every Monday evening, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the middle of the summer, all that stuff. I got my weapons test, I did my physical test. When I left after 7 years, the Army Peg Centre in Glasgow sent me my final payslip. And it said I was still a grade 3 band 3 gunner. So I was, without any question at all, the least successful soldier the British Army's ever known. And I had some fun, actually. I had to take a dinner once, and it was Field Marshal Lord Carver was the guest speaker, and I had to introduce him. And I had the ability to say, well, sir, I'm the most junior, the most unsuccessful soldier ever in the British Army, and you're the most successful, the most senior soldier of the British Army, which is a rather nice little contrast.
We should have framed that payslip, quite frankly. Sounds remarkable. But no, you know, I know we've lightheartedly talked about your military career, but that's still a huge contribution to our nation's defence. So I think a third of the British Army these days is made up of the Army Reserve. So, and we've seen them deployed on operations and for homeland resilience, most recently during the COVID-19 outbreak. So we do need them, and all of that training and contribution to our national resilience, even when things aren't going wrong, is really important. But you juggle all that alongside a busy city career as well. And it's always a good opportunity when I do meet reservists on this podcast to talk about that, because that's a lot of strain. They talk about these kind of 3 parts to a reservist career. You've got the work element, you've got the family element, and then you've got the defence element. And in the middle is the reservist. How did you find that balance between a civilian, family and military career?
Well, you're quite right in saying I'm making light of it a little bit, and that's foolish. I'm just making light of my own personal career.
Very British.
But you're totally right in saying that the reserves have made a vast contribution to our defence of the realm in Afghanistan and Iraq, apart from anything else. My own regiment lost 3 soldiers. So it's a serious matter, and not one to be made light of at all. How people like my stepson, who's in the house here, he's a private soldier in, no, he's not Lance Corporal, I beg his pardon, in 8 Rifles at the moment. He's just got into Westbury, and just passed Westbury, he's going to go to Sandhurst and become an officer after 10 years in the Reserve Army as a private soldier, and he's very proud of that. These people make a huge contribution. He's got a difficult job, he's got a young family, and he's doing all this stuff for the reserves as well. Also, incidentally, playing rugby and doing a variety of other things. And juggling all those balls in order to make a contribution to the defence of the realm, I just think is absolutely fantastic. So I make no claims about my own career, but I have huge admiration for particularly the reserves at the moment, who are just doing vast amount of work, huge contribution to what we do around the world, and as you say, balancing the civilian life at the same time.
Yeah,
one other thing about that, you know, if you're in the regular army, you've got the support of the regimental family. You're living in the base, you're with the regiment, your wife and family have got the support from the hub, from all those things that you get from the regiment. In reserves, you come back from Afghanistan, as it was at the time, and you bomb blast out, and you go straight home, and you're back in civilian life overnight, as it were. And it must be a big shock for some people without that kind of support of the regimental family.
Fair enough. That's pretty much characterised my experience of coming back from Afghanistan. But in terms of that juggling of lots have improved since when you joined the Army Reserves, or TA as it was known back then. Not in the least, we've got the Armed Forces Covenant, and we've got employers that give extra leave for reservist duty. Back then, you didn't have all that. So how on earth did you juggle it, and what was the response like? Because the city culture was different back then as well. What was that like, juggling work and those weekends, those Monday nights, etc.?
I pay my respects big time to employers who do that. They should do. Young people, young men, young men and women are going off now to serve in the reserve forces, to make a huge contribution to the nation, but also to make a huge contribution to their own company. The fact they come back from 2 weeks on camp, and they actually have better ability to do things, better understanding of themselves, better understanding of their way of life, and better able to contribute to the company or to the business or whatever it might be. So well done to those employers who give that extra leave for people who are in the reserves. But at the same time, I very much understand those companies that can't. I mean, I've got the headquarters of Remy. Remy is based in my constituency here in North Wiltshire. And if you're a small garage, for example, you've got two mechanics. Well, you can't afford to let one of your mechanics go off for 2 weeks paid leave. And one has to understand there are constraints as well as opportunities. But I think the opportunity to do something in the reserves. One of my, I'm chairman of a thing called the Armed Forces Parliamentary Trust in Parliament, and we had a dinner recently, and one of the young MPs, the MP from Bolsover, stood up and he said, I was nothing. It's rather like that advert for the Royal Navy. I was nothing in my youth. I was a rough and tough time. But the Royal Navy and serving the Royal Navy through the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme has been the best thing I've ever done. It's changed my life. And I think that applies to an awful lot of people through the reserve forces, that they find a new way of life. They find things they didn't know about themselves through their service. And I strongly respect that and strongly respect the way that they manage to do it and balance out the different aspects of their lives.
We picked up the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme with a previous guest, Jamie Stone, who served back in the day in the TA, up in the 51st Highland Volunteers, I believe. And he touched a little bit about the work of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme. Do you just want to talk about that and what that involves MPs going off to do?
Well, it's a great scheme, though I say it myself. I'm its chairman. I have been its chairman for 10 years now. It was revived 10 years ago. We take 15 MPs and peers for each of the three services, or actually as of this summer it's going to be 4 because Stratcom becomes a 4th course. We won Army, Navy and Air Force and now Stratcom. We also have 4 that go to the Royal College of Defence Studies, which is the ultimate sort of strategic. So total therefore, let me see now, 4 times 15 goes 60, plus 64 MPs and peers a year.
So 10% of Parliament.
10%, pretty much. And spread over a 5-year Parliament, 5 times 60 goes 300, so that's probably half of all of the House of Commons. There are a few peers in there as well. They go off in some kind of uniform. They wear a working dress, battle dress basically. I mean, not battle dress, I mean combat dress.
No rank.
Battle dress. I've slipped back into the Second World War. No, it's not uniforms. No rank, no berets, no stable belts. No, they're not wearing uniform. But it's just it's good when they go and visit a unit. If they can wear something that looks like what the boys and girls are wearing, they can go and sit in the naffy and have coffee and talk as equals. If they go in wearing a suit, they're a VIP visitor.
Yeah.
And also if they're climbing into tanks or climbing into aircraft or ships or digging a hole and soars a plane, it's good to have some kind of military wear so that's fine. So they go off they've got to do a minimum of 15 days in the year with a chosen service. Most of them will do at least 30 days in the year, which out of an MP's busy diary, that's really quite a significant contribution, quite a big chunk out of their diary. They go off and the idea is that they'll see every aspect of, let's take the Army. They'll start with an hour or two in the recruiting office in Swindon High Street. Then they'll go to a basic Army training regiment in Winchester for a weekend perhaps. Then they'll go off with the Reserve Army for a weekend somewhere else. Then they'll go off to a battalion preparing for operations. Then they'll go and visit that battalion on operations. Then they'll go and spend an afternoon with the Chief of General Staff in the MOD. So they're seeing a whole spectrum, and lots of other stuff too, a whole spectrum of life in the armed services on a tactical level. They're not trying to be experts. They're not trying to be generals. They're seeing life for the ordinary man or woman in the armed services, what they do, how they live their lives, and they get to see, it's a wonderful scheme, they get to see things that no civilian ever would. And what that means is that when you get to a debate or defence questions in the House of Commons, people stand up with some degree of empathy for the armed service. They understand what it means to be a soldier, they understand what it means to be serving in Afghanistan or to be injured even more. And they stand up and they sympathise with what people are saying. Whereas before the scheme, they stood up and they have no clue whatsoever, most of them, or unless they were ex-servicemen themselves. So I think it's a great scheme. It's going great guns. We're fully oversubscribed at the moment, so 64 this year. Takes quite a lot of effort to get it all sorted and organised, but it goes extremely well, and people love it. The boys and girls, the MPs of every description, every party, of course, absolutely love it. I had 40 of them here at my house last week for dinner, down in the bar, a supper down the bar, lasagna and red wine it was. And every kind of person, Stephen Kinnock, for example, Neil Kinnock's son, doing a fantastic job now, and on the front bench, the Labour front bench, came down here simply in order to say how much he'd enjoyed the Armed Forces Parliamentary scheme. Every member of the Labour front bench has been through the AFPS. Now, I personally, as a Conservative politician, hope this will never happen. But let's imagine that they formed a government. The fact that the whole defence front bench has been through the AFPS, I think is a matter of great pride. So it's a scheme I love. I thought it up and made it happen and chair it, and it's just something of which I'm just terribly proud.
Well done. Is an understatement in that phrase, because I've spoken to MPs that have done it. I know how much they value it. And I think you picked up on that word, empathy. And for any of our members of our armed forces community that listen to this podcast that think, MPs, they don't understand. Oh, all right, there might be one or two that don't. But I think it's really important for us to stress that there are these programmes that try and bridge that gap and try and address that. And it sounds to me, actually, you could probably extend the scheme into the blue light services and other key national infrastructure or parts of our fabric of our nation's defence and resilience that might create even more empathy in other areas. So I think I hope that we can connect on that as we seek to get those that have left into politics. Well, this is obviously sort of on the inside of politics and connection to the military.
Before I forget, one person I have to thank a lot for this scheme is a fellow called Lieutenant Colonel John Longbottom, who
HAC.
is HAC. Reserve officer, served in Afghanistan, served in Musakala, amongst other things, so distinguished career. But he's now spent 10 years running the thing for me in Parliament. And Johnny and Amy in my office also do a fantastic job making it happen. And then I get three Lieutenant Colonels from the MOD run the three services. And a combined team is just a fantastic operation and makes a huge contribution, I think, to the defence of the realm and to Parliament. And MPs send people to war. We take those decisions. We make all these things about procurement, we take those decisions, and we need to know a bit more than we do know. I think the FPS and also the All-Party Parliament Group for the Armed Forces, which I also chair, makes a big contribution towards doing that. So it's something to. When I go to my grave, I often think, what will they write in my Telegraph obituary? If I have one, I probably won't get one, but if I did, what will they write? And the answer is, I'd be very proud if they write, he formed and ran the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme and the All-Party Parliament Group for the Armed Forces. Those two bodies, together with another thing, Operation Christmas Box, which I'm patron of, which I'll talk about in a moment. It's nice to have a thing of which one can be proud, and which one's own, a small thing but mine own.
Yeah, well, and we'll outlive you and I with any luck. And in terms of the all-party parliamentary group on the armed forces, APPGs are part of the fabric of our democracy. Can you tell us, in general, a little bit about the roles of an APPG, what they do? I know there's literally hundreds of them, and then we'll dial into your work on that particular APPG.
Well, APPGs vary an enormous amount. Sometimes they're completely and utterly useless. Somebody forms them, whether the APPG on Johnny Ball.
Sounds like a brilliant idea.
Great idea, yeah.
On podcasting, there you go.
On podcast. And there are far, far, far too many of them, mainly worthless. I do only two. One is the All-Party Group for the Armed Forces, and the other is the All-Party Group for the Polar Regions, which combines, because I do a lot of defence stuff in the Arctic and the Antarctic, so the two work together. Both are hyperactive. So the APG for the Armed Forces has an event in Parliament, roughly 2 to 3 a month. Nearly always a 3 and 4 star speaker comes across from Parliament, comes across the MOD rather. It's nearly always over a dinner or a breakfast or lunch, but not always. And then maybe about 60 MPs each time turn up and listen to what this person's got to say. So it's a very good way of connecting between the armed forces and the MOD and Parliament at a very, very senior level. But that organisation also does one-offs. So we do every single brigade that came back from Afghanistan and Iraq marched into Parliament. 120 soldiers, sailors and airmen came in from Wellington Barracks, where they formed up, marched in through Parliament Square, Guards band leading them in, or Royal Marines band leading them in, the great north door of Westminster Hall, met by the Prime Minister very often, or me, but if they were lucky, they got the Prime Minister. And then downstairs for a bit of booze up, actually, quite a few beers on the terrace. And it's just a way of Parliament saying thank you to our armed services and the fantastic work which they've done on operations. And then we've done one-offs to commemorate various events. So we had the 300th anniversary of the Gunners, big parade. We had a beating retreat by the Gurkhas in the Speaker's Court, as it's called, the little parade square there. And we've done a series of sort of one-off visits and events of that kind. So the APG for the Armed Forces is extremely active, and again, just plays its part in just getting Parliament to understand, House of Commons in particular, to understand our armed forces, because these decisions that we're taking, whether it be on deployments, but even on procurement, on what to do about Ajax, which now a problem is now solved, we think. MPs can actually find out by going to these events and riding in an Ajax and actually finding out about the vibration, about the noise problems and all that stuff through the AFPS. So I think it's a very, very important. But the two organisations, the AFPS and APG together, form a very important bridge between MPs who would otherwise potentially be totally ignorant of the armed forces. And many of them come in, they say, I wouldn't know the difference between a corporal and a colonel, I wouldn't know the difference between the army and the navy, tell me. They come in with really no understanding at all, but thanks to the FPS and the APG, they come out at the end of a parliament, let's say, with significantly increased understanding, which is great.
Have you kind of seen that? We've got to get, mentioning no names, but have you seen that with your own eyes? Particular MPs who come in at the beginning of that, whether that be the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme or joining your APPG, have you seen their empathy and their perceptions change before your very eyes?
I most certainly have. One example, I remember this donkeys years ago when I did the course myself. In those days, it was just two MPs, me and a Labour MP. And this particular Labour MP was a very, very close friend of mine. He wouldn't mind me mentioning it, Brian Donahue, very good bloke. I said, so why are you doing this course then? He said, well, because I know all those officers are a bunch of Ruperts, and they're just grinding the face of the private soldiers in the dirt, and I'm going to find that out. And I said, Brian, I don't think you're right there, I think you'll find that most officers have gone through exactly the same training, plus, that any rank has gone through, and I think we then did the course together, and he was very active and took a really keen interest in it. At the end of it, I remember saying to me, James, you've opened my eyes. I just didn't have any clue whatsoever. I thought it was all about these Ruperts being rotten to the private soldiers. I was totally and utterly wrong, and now I understand a little bit about what the armed services do. So I think Brian, who then went on to a distinguished career in Parliament, won't mind me naming him, that actually he was someone who learned a huge amount, having known nothing about the armed services at all, came in and learned a huge amount about it, and you could see that in his speeches and his questions. You could see that he actually had a feeling and empathy for the armed service, and he was able to say, on my experiences in the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, I discovered that such and such and such and such. So that's a classic, a real example.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that, and thank you, Brian, for your work with that.
I better tell him I named him now.
Nice name check. But you do see that in debates in Parliament, actually, and I saw that during the Afghanistan and the pitting debate. There's obvious points of reference where people stood up. Dan Jarvis, enormously respected.
Oh, great man. He's a great man.
Hugely, credible and amazing authority on that subject, having served in Afghanistan with great distinction. And then, and Tom Tugendhat on the other side stood up, and there's a picture of them in Afghanistan having served there together. Right? It's an amazing photo. You should dig it out. But then I remember in that debate, there was people like Stephen Doughty from the Labour side who stood up, and I thought, where does this empathy come from? Because he's not obviously a military person like Dan and Tom, but it's things like the APPGs that create that understanding, that contact and closeness to the armed forces.
Stephen Dodd's a very good example. I think he knew nothing about the armed forces before he came into it. He did the APG, done the AFPS. He's now one of my trustees in the Armed Forces Parliamentary Trust, so he's actually a trustee of it now, so it's been very helpful. and he's now joined the reserve forces in 77 Brigade as a political wing of 77 Brigade, and he's doing his training and everything else. So he's gone from nothing. There's another one, another MP whose name I've just forgotten offhand who it is, has just joined the Royal Military Police. Thanks to his training with the AFPS. So
was it Will Quince?
It was Will Quince. That's what it was. Will Quince. Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And there's another one I think joined the Royal Naval Reserve from memory. And so quite often we have that 2 or 3 people go through the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme and then land
it inspires them to serve.
Yeah.
I saw Stephen Doughty at Labour conference in 2022. And I went up to him and recounted that story about how impressed I was in the way that he acknowledged the nature of the debate between Dan and Tom, who were disagreeing actually on a fundamental point, I think. But it was the way in which they conducted. And Stephen said, look, this is how to debate here. Look at these 2 examples. And I said to him, is it right you joined the Army Reserve? I'd heard. He's like, how did you know? I was like, well, I'm making my business to know, of course. But so yeah, perhaps we'll get Stephen on the show.
But Dan's a great man. Dan Jarvis is a great man, and it's so good that he's on the Labour benches because, without being party political, there are quite a large number of former soldiers, sailors, and airmen on the Tory benches, and particularly the House of Lords. Whereas fewer on the Labour benches. So actually, having someone like Dan Jarvis standing up and really knows to talk about, and Stephen Doughty and others. On the Labour benches, it's actually very, very important indeed.
Yeah, we've interviewed Dan on a couple of occasions, including our Labour Party Conference special, which I would implore our listeners to dig out in the archives. So some amazing work you've been involved there, and you also mentioned a couple of campaigns there. One is the Operation Christmas Box, and having served on a winter tour in Afghanistan, and those boxes come in from home. I mean, my own aunt, she started a campaign knitting hats with the WI, and we knitted hundreds of hats. We continued it actually when I went back into work in politics and kept that flow of knitting. It was just morale, knowing that someone actually cares about you at home. You get a hat through the post. Our chain of command let us wear these, all sorts of different colours in our patrol base. But tell us a bit about Operation Christmas Box. I'm
very proud of Operation Christmas Box. It's a great organisation. I'm its patron. I don't know quite why they asked me, but it was very nice of them to do so, and help them in particular with raising funds for their operation. But they're a superb organisation. They send out ammo box lookalikes, rather small ammo box lookalikes, but they're red and green, and they're not quite like the real thing. But a proper clasp on them and a proper padlock so they can be used for other things throughout the year. And inside you find both fun things. You'll find a photograph of me, so you can throw things at that. That's pretty good, chuck stuff at it. And a Santa hat and a clockwork toy that runs around. But also some useful stuff. You get all kinds of useful helmet light, for example, and a cutting device, a special sort of multi-tool thing, and a variety of useful things that people have during the year. And the purpose of it, we send them out to every single service person deployed on Christmas Day. So that at the peak of Terrick and Herrick, I think we got up to 25,000 boxes one year, that's the maximum. Each of these boxes costing incidentally 30 quid, so it's quite a large fundraising effort to do it. We're now down about 7,500, I think, at the moment. And it's just a way of saying it's very, very often it's the only thing that gets through on Christmas Day. And it's just because the BFPO do it for us. It's just a way of saying to service people, well, we're remembering you. You're out there, whatever you might be doing on a ship or down a hole, or remembering that you're doing it, and the people back here are paying our respects to you for it. So I'm rather proud of it. It's good. It's good organisation. And if any of your listeners have any money, Operation Christmas Box, that's what we want it for.
As a recipient, I can't overstate knowing that someone, someone's put that together, someone's fundraised for that, and they're thinking of you while you're away from your loved ones at Christmas is quite special. And each one of those boxes represents a human being that's away from their families and friends, and also the scale of operations at that snapshot in time. You mentioned 25,000 during Iraq and Afghanistan, in one Christmas, and was it 7,000 in other years? So that they also represent how busy we are at different times of the year. So thank you on that amazing work, and I'll put some links in on the show notes to Operation Christmas Box so people can look up in their own time and help out with that amazing campaign. But in order to do all this work, James, you've got to actually get elected in the first place, right? And I say to people, get involved. stand up and serve again, become a local councillor, become an MP, and just get involved in public office. But why did you get involved in public office in the first place, and what was that journey like?
Well, another campaign of which I'm very proud at the moment, and might give you an example of why it is that I'm keen to be in public office, is the campaign that we've just won to recognise the traumas endured by LGBTQ service people until 2001. It's amazing that homosexuality was legalised in 1967, but the armed services didn't legalise until 2001. And many of these soldiers, sailors and air people were court-martialed. They lost their pensions, they lost the right to wear the beret on Remembrance Sunday, they
Medals.
lost their medals. And I just thought that's an absolute disgrace. So I got involved in this little campaign. There's a very good organisation called Fighting with Pride,
Yep.
and they really are outstanding on it. And they came into Parliament and briefed us and inspired me to get involved in the campaign a little bit. I'm not trying to say I was the middle of it, but I was a little bit involved. I tried to help out. And this week, just a couple of weeks back now, the Prime Minister stood up at Prime Minister's Question Time and apologised to the nation for the way that we treated these people for the 23 years since it became legal. And just achieving something, seeing something which you believe to be an injustice, which no question about it was an injustice, and making some little contribution to putting that right. Not doing it yourself, not being the big centre important person, just making some little contribution to fighting with other people to try and put right something that's wrong, is what you can do in Parliament. I think if you go into Parliament believing you can change the world, that you're the saviour of the world, you're going to become the most important and famous person ever, well, A, you're wrong, and B, you're an egotist, and C, you're going to lose. You won't succeed at doing that. Whereas if you go into Parliament thinking, well, actually, I'm going to try my best to do what I can for the people of North Wiltshire, in my case, the South Cotswolds, or for the various different interest groups, in my case, for the armed services, do what you can around the edges, try and improve things a little bit, then you have to presume that there are other MPs and peers and other people doing the same thing, and you can try and achieve something. So I think there are many people who are Margaret Thatcher, brilliant Tony Blair, brilliant politicians. I wouldn't claim to be one of them. I wouldn't want to be one of them. What I do claim to be is someone who can add my voice to lots of others for some of the good causes I've come across and helping people in the best way I can, trying to make Britain a better place as best I can, and in particular trying to do what I can for the armed services through all the different things I've done, the House of Commons Defence Committee and all these other organisations. So I would just say to people, if you're out there and you're in the armed services, for example, and you're wondering what to do next, don't come into politics if you think you're going to save the world, because you won't. But if you think you'd like to make your little contribution to trying to improve the way of life for people in the armed services, then do that. So I'll pay tribute to my friend Johnny Mercer, for example. He did that. He didn't really know much about politics at all. He came straight out of the army, arrived in Parliament. He didn't know how to spell Parliament. He didn't know where the coffee machine was.
Yeah, he admits himself he made a lot of mistakes as well.
He made loads of mistakes to begin with. But well done to him. I mean, he really got stuck into it, and he's done tremendous work for veterans, and now, of course, he's the Minister for Veterans Affairs. And I salute Johnny. He's got his downsides. He's got his, he's a bit of a character in lots of respects. But my goodness, the work he's done for veterans, and the same applies to so many other people who I think you'll be interviewing during your course of podcasts. So many of them come into Parliament. My friend Bob Stewart, he's given a hard time, old Bob. He's brilliant. A great man. What a great man. And the last DSO for Valour issued, a great soldier. And the work he's done for the armed service in Parliament is just terrific. Now, people can have a go at Bob, and they are at the moment. They're having a go because he did something rude about made some off-the-cuff remark about something else. But what a great to see a man like Colonel Bob Stewart led our troops in Bosnia, coming into Parliament and speaking up for the armed services. I salute him. I think he does tremendous work, and so many others like him too.
Yeah, and I had the privilege of interviewing Bob as well last year, and we had a really good chat. The word that you mentioned actually was the J word, justice, and that overriding sense of fighting for justice. And you gave a brilliant, big sort of macro example, but how does that manifest in the work of an MP in fighting for justice for others in sort of day-to-day work life?
Well, it's justice, but it's also just the way they live. I love my surgeries, and people come into my surgeries with the most idiotic things. The lavatory doesn't work. I remember a good example of the sort of thing. An old boy came in to see me, and he said he couldn't pay his gas bill. So I just rang the 0800 number at the top of the gas bill and spoke to them a while and said this chap couldn't pay his gas bill. And they said, well, would £5 a week be any good? And I said, was that £5 a week any good? And the old gents, well, £5 a week, that's no problem. Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Gray. Thank you. Now, I hadn't done anything. Yeah. All I'd done was rang the 0800 number and said it's James Gray MP here. And that's made whether justice is quite the right word, I'm not sure, but just doing things to help people round the edges, try and seek to shove the country in the right vague direction, I think is enormously satisfying. You can actually achieve something. You can feel you've done something worthwhile in your surgeries or in these little campaigns or in Parliament, or But as I say, the main thing really is I can't stand MPs, of whom there are quite a large number, who think very highly of themselves. It's a great mistake. I much prefer. I think it was Powell described what an MP should be, like a butterfly, fluttering from one flower to the next flower, cross-pollinating, and doing a little bit around the edges and just helping to make the thing happen, and you stand a chance of being useful. Whereas if you think you're the God's gift, you're A, wrong, and you're B, going to disappoint yourself and your constituents as well. So just doing what you can to find help with justice, help with your constituents in every possible way, and you can go to bed at night and sleep well, a happy man, albeit perhaps not the most important or successful.
I don't know who it was that said it. I think it might have been James Sunderland who said it to me, that don't come into politics because you want to be something. Come into politics because you want to do something. And it's a phrase that's used in lots of things, but I think it's really true. And as you say, all too often the balance of people that think they want to be something, and we're seeing an increasing number of MPs becoming journalists, quite oddly, rather than spending their time perhaps with their constituents, which is a conversation perhaps for another day. But no, James, you've given us such a brilliant insight into the work of MPs in general, but also some of those campaigns that really tie into the armed forces community. And just on behalf of all of us, actually, for those of us, if you've served on operations overseas at Christmas, or if you've had an MP come and sit next to you in the Scoff House, dressed in uniform, starting asking you questions about about stuff, thinking, why on earth are they here? Or indeed, if you're from the LGBTQI community as well, and the work you've done with the likes of Fighting with Pride, thank you for all of that work, because it covers a lot of bases there. And I will put in those links below to some of those campaigns in the show notes. But for now, James Gray, here in your home, and your beautiful home in an amazing part of the world. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
and let's stay in touch.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.